Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our episode titled Finding Hope, the Road to Recovery. My name is Dr. Jessica Lasater. I am a clinical supervisor and clinical psychologist at Tarzana Treatment Centers. Today we're going to be talking about youth co-occurring disorders. And before we begin, I would love to introduce our guest, Mark Winkler, our program coordinator. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Jessie. As Dr. Jessie said, my name is Mark Winkler. I am a program coordinator over at Tarzana Treatment Centers, working with a program we call Future Leaders, OAYI, Opiate Effective Youth Initiative. And I'm also a joy advocate, but we'll talk about that a little bit. I'm glad to be here.
So today our focus is going to be on youth substance use and mental health disorders, or as we call it, is co-occurring disorders. A quick explanation of co-occurring disorders is when a child is diagnosed with both substance use and mental health. We do want to explain the whereabouts of where co-occurring disorders might be created. There's internal and external impacts, and we also want to continue along this line of whole person care and integrated treatment at Tarzana Treatment Centers. So to kind of jump into that and discuss, let's start with talking about internal impacts. So internal impacts are similar to internal developmental impacts. When we think about that, we think about a child along the spectrum of their development. So we think of the small child who grows up in a hopefully beautiful, loving household. And there's some key factors. So specifically at Tarzana, we try to focus between the ages of 6 and 18. You might hear a terminology called transitional age youth, and that's 18 to 24. And we do also assist with that population. But for today's episode, we're focusing between the ages of mainly 12 to 18. So when we think of internal developmental impacts, we can pull in the thought process of what children are going through developmentally at that time. So we see during the ages of like 6 to 12, kids are trying to establish themselves as human beings. This looks like they are trying to find their purpose. They're trying to see what they're good at. And then as they move into a teenager, the main thing that they're focused on is identity versus confusion, which, to kind of label that through Erickson, identity versus confusion is a child who's trying to figure out who they are. And I think we all see that in teenagers. They're trying to make a place for them. Mark, what do you think about that?
When you say that development of identity between the ages of 6 to 12, right? I think about young men and women, right? And how they really develop their identity. And a lot of those cues are taken on the schoolyard, right? And how young men develop this sense of what I call radicalized masculinity, or some people call toxic masculinity. And they move away from being connected to their overall emotional content themselves, how they should respond to the world around them, right? And women, young girls, are pushed away from tapping in to emotions that will be considered inappropriate for them, right? So they're trying to establish their identity in spaces where their true identity is really difficult to emerge. So, but it is critical that we concentrate on that time span, that 6 to 12, and really tap in and see what's happening. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. It actually moves us into this conversation about external impacts. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because external developmental impacts are looked at in a way of what's going on around the child. So when we see that, I think of this wonderful educator. I studied him when I was in graduate school, Bronfenbrenner. And so Bronfenbrenner, he discussed these different subsystems, right? So we know as educators, facilitators, psychotherapists, program coordinators, the whole lot. We know that their parents are a big aspect of what affects them, but we also know peer pressure. We know that resources. So if it's a single parent home, there's so many cultural, socioeconomic impacts that are happening that will affect a child. Then we think of even bigger impacts, and that can lead to cultural impacts, that could lead to COVID-19, which we'll step in and discuss. And so with each impact leads to a developmental change, all during a time when children are going through this identity and confusion. They're trying to figure out who they are, and everything around them is making it very clear to them of what path they want to take.
Sure. We can't leave out that ever-present monster called social media.
Yes.
Right. And so they are trying to navigate all of these different systems, all of these different stimuli. And then they wake up in the morning and they pick up their phone, and the social media is telling them to think this way, to do this. This is, if you do this, then you'll be this. And so navigation becomes a lot more difficult in this day and age for youths. And so, we'll talk about it more, but parents really have to cue in during this time and really just sort of talk to their children about what's happening with their thought process. So it's really, it's much more important, but we'll jump into that a little bit deeper later.
So to kind of go a little bit deeper into Bronfenbrenner, Bronfenbrenner is this person who had a multitude of subsystems. So I would love to kind of go through each of them just so that people could understand the different effects that we're working with. So when we think of co-occurring disorders, so we will receive a child that has a substance use or mental health disorder, but we have to look at the system that they're living in so that we can provide different arrangements in their life, different support systems in their life, which I think Tarzana Treatment Centers does a wonderful job at with all the resources we provide. But a certain example would be, if we received a parent who, let's say, is a, 2-parent household, maybe 3 siblings, and both parents are working full time, already that time constraint of having to work an 8 to 5, their children are at school, and they have multiple siblings that all have their own unique pathway, I should say, you know? And so now they have to go to treatment. They have to work with a mental health therapist. They have to maybe work with a substance abuse counselor. And so we have to kind of jump in with external resources. And so in that might look providing a therapist. It might look like providing a case manager. So, case manager is someone who works with the parents to provide certain resources like medical insurance or housing or resources. And then a substance abuse counselor is someone who will focus on whatever the child is currently addicted to at that time. And so to pave the way to something big that recently happened, I think we are all still coming out of it, is COVID-19.
Yes.
So COVID-19 was a very big thing that occurred for youth specifically. I think it affected obviously everyone in the world. It affected every single family, but it uniquely affected youth. And so I just want to read some statistics, and maybe we could talk a little bit about that. But UCSD, they found out that during the time of COVID-19, nicotine and use of prescription drugs went up exponentially. And we saw that in the opioid epidemic that occurred, and the multiple lives that were lost to children in different subsystems that weren't able to provide the support that was needed because of the misuse. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, just to jump back, the way we approach treatment at Tarzana Treatment Centers, right? It's a whole child, right? And the whole child includes the parents, the extended family, if there's a grandmother or a grandfather or a coach. So we bring in all of those elements, because when you are talking about treating a child, when you're talking about looking at how to heal a child, really, you can't isolate the child from the environment, right? Because then what happened is you take that child and you put them right back in the environment, and then unless he is just such strong will, he's going to fall prey to the behaviors of the environment, right? Because he's still learning, he's still growing, his mind's still developing. COVID, you're right, it did a lot to isolate children from that need to be connected with their social environment. Recently, the Surgeon General declared a isolation pandemic, right? Because a lot of people have not recovered from that. They got disoriented on how to really be connected, right? And they got much more connected to having friendships through social media. And so they lost that personal touch.
Yeah.
And it's difficult when the parents lost it as well, right? Because there was a lot of fear about, getting infected, getting sick, right?
Yeah.
So that fear really drove behavior, and that has not properly been dealt with. So it's absolutely necessary to look at the whole child and all the environment and really look at those social changes, those really impactful changes that are affecting children's just their processes, their developmental processes.
Yeah. It's interesting, as you were talking, it brought up something that I remembered when I was writing my dissertation, and it was in regards to a study that was done on mice, and it was called Rat Park. And what they did is they isolated rats in one cage with nothing, no families, no activities, and they gave them cocaine water. And then they did the other, but they had families and they had activities. And what they had seen was the isolated rats ended up using cocaine water compared to the rats that had families and had activities. And it was really an astounding study that I think really affected understanding how substance use and even mental health works. We know isolation is such a negative factor for adults, but specifically for youth, it's imperative because they're going through so many social developmental stages, and COVID put a halt at that.
Yes.
And so add in not just the COVID halt of that, but it also enhanced social media, which then enhanced a lot of negative factors like bullying and lack of control on the parents' side because their kids had access to any type of information that they could find. And so which was interesting because even on the mental health side, like during COVID-19, they saw that 30% of emergency room visits increased of youth. So that means 30% of children were going to psychiatric settings due to the fact of suicidal ideation, substance misuse, and that was a really scary result of that.
I mean, think about it. You put people who don't normally spend that much time around each other, right? So disagreements, dislikes, those dynamics don't get to play out if the parents are working, the children in school. They come back, they're exhausted normally, and what they want to do is just veg out in front of the television or go to sleep, right?
Yeah.
But that didn't happen during COVID.
Yeah.
Parents were not working, children were not in school. And so you had all of this energy just sort of swirling around, and all of the things that were unattended, all of the untreated, unhealed traumas really start playing themselves out. And the parents who did not have the techniques to really expunge and deal properly with that trauma, it was poured into the children.
Yeah.
And the children, of course, they didn't have the proper tools because they were not at treatment, right? They were not being healed the whole self. And so you really had this problem that just grew and grew and grew. And this is kind of where we are now. So I'm glad that I'm a part of a dynamic that is looking at healing the child, but not just the child, sort of to throw back to what you just said, healing the whole child and looking at all the aspects of the child and how do we make sure that we address all the things that can affect their developing minds.
Yeah. I think another thing that we've been seeing at our youth facility together is the increase in nicotine use. I think the majority of our substance use children that come to our facility are using nicotine. And it's very interesting because even though they're underage and they don't have the access to obtain it, somehow they're obtaining it. And nicotine is, it's interesting because it's not necessarily viewed as a drug in the adult population, but we know in the youth population how it affects the brain, increases cravings, things like that, as well as just the interesting fact of how drug use hasn't, the magnitude of drug use has increased. So like with nicotine use in general, we think of a cigarette that has like 10 milligrams and our kids are walking around with vapes with 50 milligrams. They can't go an hour without using it because of how addictive the substance is. And we hear that from our marijuana users as well, where, you know, they can't go a day without using it and the strength of it. And I think it kind of just shows the progress, I should say, of where drug use is coming and going. It's becoming so strong that, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a youth or adult, the substances are so addictive that they're so hard to pull away from.
And that's, you know, that's unfortunate because you're right, the concentration of nicotine and vapes, it's so much stronger. With marijuana, I believe it's like natural, if you smoke just naturally outside of a vape, you're getting like 12%. Concentrated, once they break down and vape it, it's like 50%. And that's highly addictive, right? And then they put certain flavors in there. So they actually draw that population to that product. And you're right. And they don't understand because they get a certain release of chemicals and they feel good when that happens, right? And if they are not addressing the issues that are causing them to feel unhappy or to feel disconnected from their joy, then that becomes a viable option for them over and over and over again. So you're right, we're seeing a lot of increase in nicotine and marijuana vape usage. And here's the scary thing, Dr. Jessie, we're seeing it in middle schools, right? So they're starting much younger, using these substances to find pathways to their joy, to their perceived joy. And so that's something that we are addressing. Yes.
I'm actually glad you brought the word joy up because I think this is something that we try to work with parents and understanding and also youth. It's a big psychoeducation piece. And so in a child's brain, their brain is not fully formed. We have seen research over and over again that the brain is not even fully formed to middle 20s at this point. Just keeps getting extended with every research study. But what's fascinating is the area of the brain that is most functioning is the amygdala, and it's the joy center, it's the feeling center, it's the emotional center. And one of the least developed is the prefrontal cortex. So that process to think through, have that analytical thought process. And so we have these kids who are isolated because of COVID-19, going through multiple different stressors, being a teenager, trying to figure out who they are in this world, confused about who they are because everything has in its own way been removed from them, from sports to hobbies to, you know, extracurriculars, you know, on top of the socioeconomic and just their family system stressors possibly. And then we have these highly addictive drugs on the market that are producing almost a fake sense of joy, a fake sense of enjoyment. And
absolutely.
It's this cyclical almost sensation that's happening for them.
And it's hard for them to break the cycle. I mean, the amygdala is also the fear center, right? So they are operating from that fear, joy, and this confusion. And then you're right, that prefrontal cortex is still trying to catch up, right? And the disconnection from all the things that can lead to a proper development is being delayed, or they're not being introduced to, but also they're disconnected from nature, right? There's a strong disconnect from nature. And that's something that I think in treatment, I like to use the word in healing, right? So in healing the child, we have to look at the areas of disconnection that could really heal them. And when we look at them being disconnected from nature, they are nature, right? So them not having any contact with nature or a very limited contact with nature doesn't give them an opportunity to really experience a fuller self, right? And I mean, so it's like being disconnected from your family, right? Because we are nature, nature's us, right? The tree's like our cousin, right? So imagine a child being disconnected from their family, and then we're saying, you have to be whole. You have to do the right thing, but we don't take them out and give them an opportunity to see the more expansive self. Right. And so it's a lot to this healing thing, and I just think that it's important that who's ever involved in this healing process that they really look at the whole child. Right. And now when I say the whole child, I mean there's them, their immediate family, their extended family, the community, and all that in the context of nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was a great summary.
Mm-hmm.
So at this moment, we're actually going to take a quick break. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will be right back.
I was diagnosed at 37. I had 2 children, made the kids' lunches, took them to school, was on the BTA. I started to feel tired, that I thought I had swollen glands. Life was going to change for me pretty quick. Went to the doctor, he put me on an antibiotic. A week later, I started feeling like a lump at the side of my neck. They immediately took an x-ray and said, that's a tumor. They did the biopsy, found out it was cancer, started me on chemo and radiation right away. Since I was so young, I wanted to try to save my voice. And I was okay for about a year. Then I was brushing my teeth, and I spit up some blood. So, back to the doctor, and he's like, next step is, we gotta remove the voice box.
آینه را در شبکه‌های اجتماعی دنبال کنید.
This is a message for United Nations and for all the nations globally. Help Iranian people. Women, children, men are suffering on the streets of Iran. Help Iranian people. 4 decades of atrocities. They need your help.
How long are you going to remain silent? Wake up. Stop supporting Iranian government. Our people need you.
Women around the world stand in solidarity with the women of Iran. We are with you. We will be your voice.
The Persian Empire gifted human rights to the world, to the United Nations. Today, we look forward to your support to use the concept that brought unity to the whole world, to bring it back to my people, to my country. We appreciate all the love and support we get from everyone.
To all the non-Iranian artists who have supported Iran during this time, we thank you. We need your support. The Iran issue is a human rights issue.
Please stand by Iranian people. Women, life, liberty.
part, we're going to focus on treatment, whole person care, and different ways that we can assist your child and your family through treatment of both substance use disorders and mental health disorders. So let's jump right into
Let's
it. Okay, so treatment. With youth treatment, it's a whole person care. So from start to finish, and even with finish, ongoing. So what that looks like at Tarzana specifically is, we always start first phone call discussing what treatment looks like. So we receive referrals from many different organizations, families, clients themselves, and we talk to them about what treatment looks like. We assess for substance use disorders, mental health disorders. We assess for the need of the family. So that could look like if their family needs assistance financially or resourcing. And then once we do that initial assessment, we then move on to treatment. So that is usually linking up with the specific program or therapist or counselor, because we have so many different opportunities at Tarzana Treatment Centers, to then assess the child where they're at. And so maybe you could jump in a little bit of, your experience with that whole person care.
One of the things I like about Tarzana is the approach, right? When we look at the whole child, right, and we're doing that initial assessment and we're assessing needs, we also assess strengths. Right, because there's things that the family has done that's gotten them from point A to point us, right? And by pulling out or extracting and amplifying those strengths, we're able to create, one, a sense of we're not here to fix you, right? We're here to have a co-creative healing process. And I think anyone that does treatment anywhere, they really need to look at the child and the family, and not in an isolated context, right? Not in a broken context, but in if anything, maybe a misguided, off track, right? Separated from their greatness, their joy, and see how we can help them to put them back into that process. And I see a lot of that happening at Tarzana. I don't see the treatment providers or the healers looking at them as individuals that they need to feel sorry for, right? Or they need to, like they're mechanics or something, need to get out their tools to fix. They're looking at, here's a group of people who want to be joyful, but have been misguided from that. If you think about a child, right? When a child is first born, after the slap, the child is quickly smiling or learning all those things, and there's just this joyfulness, right? And what happens is that's interrupted, right? The things that come into the child's life, these adverse child situations, some unintended and some, very intentional. And so I think what I like about the process that I see with Tarzana is they try and do their best to recognize that these are human beings that need love, right, and connection. And so,
No, I think that was very beautifully said. I think in working at Tarzana, so I've been working there for about 6 years, Tarzana has grown exponentially. So we see that in the magnitude of the differences of programs. And so, to name a few, we have these beautiful prevention-based services. And so we think of prevention, we think of, these community-based members that are advocating to prevent a mental health disorder, a co-occurring disorder, a substance use disorder. And so we have, multitude of prevention-based services in youth, where they go into the field, they go into school-based community centers, they go into Boys and Girls Club, they do presentations, and they lead with psychoeducation, as well as that'd be a forward connection. They try to form that connection with the community so that the community can connect back to Tarzana and see that there's further treatment options, you know? And then as we move through that, I mean, then we think outside prevention, the main treatments. And so treatment can obviously look as psychotropic medication, so psychiatry. It can look like mental health therapists and treating a mental health disorder. It can look like substance abuse counselors and going to group counseling and you know, individual counseling. And then there's these awesome adjunct-based grants. And so they're a little bit prevention, a little bit treatment. And you know that because you're, you know, leading one of those main grants. And I would love for you to kind of expand upon these adjunct grants that are a little bit treatment, a little bit, you know, prevention-based, because it's this hybrid program that really helps with that connection.
Yeah, we have several programs, several grants that work with helping the youth in the community, the surrounding community, to understand what some of the things that could prevent a child from having a full, joyful experience. And you're right, it's happening in different environments. It's happening in schools, it happens in the home. And the thing I really like is, because when I think of healing a child, right? I can't separate the child from the environment, right? I can't separate the child's experience just walking down the street, right? And there's so many different entities that the child experiences in the community that are actually doing the work to help to heal the community, right? And by us having our foot soldiers, if you will, boots on the ground, out and making those connections, and I really believe it should start before the process starts. We should know within a mile radius all the treatment or all the healing entities in the community, so we can immediately, even during the process of the healing, to connect and to bring in and to start having that sort of collaborative, co-creative activities. Because we get a short amount of time to work with the families and the youth that we work with, right? And so we really have to, and I think we're doing a good job at it at Tarzana. I think we're doing a good job to make those connections. I just see that, and as we get deeper and more intentional with that, that can look like from the beginning, having these sort of roundtable discussions of people that are in the community, from the businesses to the spiritual communities to the mental health aspects of the communities to the parenting, just all of that. So when you bring in a child to a healing experience, the child really gets to experience a whole healing. And so when you put that child back into the community, that child is not, I mean, we put scuba gear around the child, right? Like, you know, secure underwater breathing apparatus, right? But those waters are strong, right? And the stimuli that pulls upon a child's mind, that developing mind that you spoke about, if that child is not immediately connected to, or that family is not immediately connected to a continual of what we're giving them, eventually they're going to be pulled away from their joy. Because it's a practice, right? Everything that we teach, everything that we give, it's a practice. If you don't practice it, you're going to fall back again to the behaviors that brought you to our attention. So,
No, and when you were speaking about that, I was thinking, I think that is one of Tarzana's main strengths, is that they require a certain level of care. And so in that certain level of care, we hear, you know, these fancy titles called evidence-based practices. And so evidence-based practices are this requirement that everybody in the facility that is working with our youth and our family members is trained in something that has been studied, and it has been peer-reviewed, and it has been shown to improve the lives of our youth. So every single grant is trained in evidence-based practice, every counselor, every mental health therapist. But not only that, it's this creative side. It's this ability to pull on different community-based members that don't always fall underneath the evidence-based practice. So we provide this unique care, this whole person care, this culturally competent care, so that we can meet every youth and family member where they're at. You know, it's not just this cookie cutter way where one size fits all. It's really meeting the youth and their family at whatever level they're at. And that can be, you know, different socioeconomics, different race, different culture, different ages, you know. We have older parents with younger kids, we have younger parents with older kids, and, you know, every single dynamic is so different. And I think the even extra special component is everybody that works within the youth facility understands the importance of working with the entire family. So it's not just working with the child and treating the child and being on this healing journey with the child, but it's this healing journey with the family, because I love that analogy of the scuba diving gear. That was amazing, because you know, we need to provide that scuba diving gear for that whole family. So when that youth is being pulled by peer pressure and social media and addiction, and you know, parents are being pulled by their job and the requirements of being a mother or father, that they have support systems. And that's why at Tarzana, where we have prevention and we have these therapists, and then we have these grants that have, you know, a prevention, you know, treatment kind of viewpoint, we're providing every single gear that we can so that once a child goes through our system, it's not just the child, the family has gone through our system. And before they leave us, they know how to operate every single gear that we've given them.
And that's the concept that we call integrated health service, right? And so the integration is that you have all of these entities designed to look at a piece of the child, right? A piece of the child. It's like, I use the analogy, it's like a joy puzzle, right? And so each individual piece, right? So we say, well, what's preventing you from having a complete joy puzzle, right? It could be mental health. It could be maybe the child needs to not be bored, maybe need connection to a sports team. Right, the parent is overwhelmed, no self-care time, right? So connecting the parent to a community where that can happen, right? So we're bringing these broken pieces or these separated pieces to the joy puzzle, and we're putting them together, so the family can really realize, from the adults to the children, that joy is not something that they just stumble into. Right, and that's what most people do. They stumble into joy, and they then, because of all of these unanswered needs, they stumble into what, you know, I call uncomfortable emotions. Right? I don't call things bad emotions, but it's an uncomfortable emotion. And because they don't have the tools and the strategies that we provide, sometimes their strengths don't outlast the emotion, and they get stuck in the emotion, right? Anger, frustration, anxiety. And then when they get stuck in the emotion, the parents, they bring that energy to the child. And the child doesn't have, as you said, that prefrontal cortex is still developing. So that child doesn't have the wherewithal to say, oh, this is not about me, right? You got that reptilian and that mammal brain operating. It's like, it's all about me, right? And so the child then is lost. And as they try to, again, go back, try to form their identity, it's being formed in an environment of an absence of joy, right? And so bringing all of this, integrating all of these treatment or healing dynamics, and then looking at the community and figuring out how can we integrate what's happening out there, right? Because one of the things I encourage everyone I work with to understand is that there is strength in the community, right? There's resilience and there's joy. We don't get to see that a lot, because when you turn on the news, you see something opposite of that, right? But there's people who are really trying to connect people to a joyful life. And as healers, as treatment providers, our goal should be to connect to those entities and integrate that into our treatment process.
No, 100%. I think it really speaks to diversifying treatment and making sure that we provide this care at every level, but it's in a framework that is I don't want to say understandable, but in a way that can be reutilized by the family. You know, I think sometimes therapists I know in my school, they taught me all these fancy words, but not always the words of how to phrase it to a child and family. And so I think you have found a really elegant way to explain what treatment is supposed to be. And I think it kind of actually goes to the trying to destigmatize treatment. We hear this quite often from youth and families, and of course there's a cultural component, but I think across the board, there's this stigma of having to see someone or talk to someone and being viewed as not good enough or being viewed as, you know, maybe less than. And it's at the core of the family. It's not just the child feeling that way, it's the family members feeling that way. And I think when we meet families at a place where, you know, this is happening on such a broad spectrum that this is not just a singular situation. That we can support the family and also fine-tuning and still meeting them where they're at. But to really destigmatize it and demystify treatment, you know, I think
I like that word,
when we focus on just the child or just the family, and we're not focusing on everything, that whole person care, the integrated care, we're missing the bigger picture. And with youth, you can't miss the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
You know, I think treatment is vastly different between adults and youth. And with adults, you know, you sometimes can just work with the individual because we're living on our own. We're dealing with our own bills. We're dealing with our own problems. But children are in an environment that is not in their control. They are in a situation that is outside their control. So how do we strengthen a child into understanding that they have more control than they do, while also supporting the people who are in the control, the parents, with providing more time and more resources and lowering that stigma and lowering that, you know, unknown factor of treatment.
I think one of the ways we can do it is at the onset of the healing process, right? We don't look at them as a manila folder, right?
That's a great example,
Dr. Bessel, in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, he said his professor taught him to not look at the folder before you meet the child and before you meet the person, right? Meet the person, because what happens is when you look at the folder, you eventually have to read it, right? But when you look at it first, you're looking at it through the prism of someone else's thoughts and experiences. That person who is analyzing or assessing that child could have had a childhood experience that is now being triggered by that child's experience, right? And so they're writing now about how horrible the parents are, right? And so the child should be separated from the parents, which may be the case, but I don't know. It's not that way all the time. So we have to meet the people first. They're human beings, right? They're on this earth. They didn't fly from some, you know, foreign planet. You know, this is planet Earth and people. So we're people, right? So we have experiences. Sometimes those experiences brings joy, and sometimes those experiences separate us from our joy, right? And we have to be able to, as healers and treatment providers, know the distinction. Right? And if you don't get to know the child, if you only know the family and the children through the eyes of so many others, which is valuable data, we have to know that, right? But if that's our only beginning, we're not going to speak during that assessment when we're looking for needs. We're not going to look for the strengths. We're just going to look at them as a needy case. And then they're going to, if that's how they see themselves now, they're going to fall into that mindset, and they're going to be disempowered, and they're going to feel like, oh, you just do your best with my child, right? As opposed to saying, how can we co-create a healing process, a healing situation that includes us as the center, right? And the only way to do that is from the beginning. We have to see them as human beings having a human experience that's got interrupted. And that cultural competence is so important, because when most of these treatment modalities were created, they were not created with cultural competency, right? So they didn't look at all the factors that make people do some of the things they do. They didn't look at slavery. They didn't look at Jim Crow. They didn't look at racism from brown and black people. That wasn't taken into account. How in the Bible, the DSM, racism is not even considered a disease, right? So we only deal with the impact of racism, right? So if you don't look at what experience the person is having in the treatment process, and you go in with just what you learn from these brilliant practitioners, but who were somewhat or maybe a lot separated from the other's experience, then you're not going to be able to heal the whole child. And we have to do that as providers and treatment providers or healers. Yeah. You see, I interchange those words a lot, right? Because we are healers.
We are,
right?
no, and I like that terminology. You know, I think we need to move away from some of the practicality word choice. And so utilizing healers, I agree, you know. Technically, I'm an LPHA, which is of the healing arts, right? You know, even though I'm a clinical psychologist.
You are a healer.
Yeah, I'm a healer. There we go. You know, and I think to bring it back to Tarzana Treatment Centers, I think they do a amazing job at providing multiple resources. They provide this prevention, they provide the mental health, the substance use. They have things like medication-assisted treatment. So for our, you know, youth who are addicted to opioids or alcohol, we have psychiatrists who work with them in order to utilize substances, psychotropic medication to help them get off of opioids or alcohol. We have inpatient facilities in AV Lancaster, so if youth need to be removed for a short term so that they can work on just their whole self, mental health and substance use, we have that. We now have a primary care physicians that can see our youth and families. We have transportation services, we have vouchers, we have nicotine cessation programs. I mean, it's endless. I mean, we have youth facilities in the San Fernando Valley, in AV Lancaster, and we're just looking to expand. And so the beauty is we continue to expand and we continue to hire healers and practitioners to support the movement of Tarzana Treatment Centers. And I think what I have enjoyed while working at Tarzana is that there is no. There's just how. How can we do it?
Absolutely.
And I think you and I have both experienced that while we've been there. So any final words before we end?
No, everything you just said, when a person comes into their healing process in that sort of environment, there's inspiration.
Yes.
Right? There is empowerment.
Yeah.
Especially if all of these systems are integrated and working together and the person is experiencing this, then the person receiving the treatment understands that there's a whole me that needs to be looked at, not just the isolated moment that perhaps brought me here.
Yes.
Right. And so I'm excited. I've been with Tarzana Treatment Centers for a year now, and I really enjoy working with the people that I've interacted with because I see a spirit of wanting to help to bring joy, right? They may not use the word joy as much as I do, but it's there. I see it.
We feel it.
We feel it. I feel the joy. So, as I said, I'm just excited to be a part of this ongoing journey, and I look forward to the work that we're going to continue to do there.
Yeah. Same here. Well, thank you for joining me, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to everyone for joining us for this presentation. If you would like more information about Tarzana Treatment Centers, please stay tuned. Other than that, I hope you have a fabulous day.
Finding hope